Hey guys, today we're going to look at 3 ways you can do sidechain compression in Reaper. So what is a sidechain? What is sidechain compression? What is sidechain gating? Well, sidechaining is when you take a signal from one source and you compress it or gate it using the signal of another source. For example, the bass guitar gets compressed every time the kick drum hits, or with a synth pad, every time the hi-hat hits, it ducks down in level or it gets this choppy effect. So we're going to do all those things in this video. First, let's listen to this track that I have here, just a little 4-bar loop of some synths, some drum samples, not a whole lot going on, but I think it sounds pretty cool. Let's hear it. So we're going to use sidechain compression to automatically kind of balance out some things and also do it for some creative effects. We're going to start off with a slow way of setting this up, kind of the manual way, just so you can see all the steps, and then kind of you'll see the value of some of the shortcuts that I'll show you next. Let's take the synth bass, this one here. Now, let's set it up so that every time the kick and the snare hits, it ducks down a little bit and it makes those signals a little bit more clear. So we will set up a compressor on this track, and for this video, we'll be using Recomp, built-in plugins for every step that I show you here. So we got Recomp on the bass synth track, this one right here. And then we're going to take a send from the bass drum track. We're going to split the signal and it's going to send into this track. So if we just make a send, it's going to actually duplicate the signal of the kick, and we're going to hear the kick on the synth track. So there's one other step we need to do here. Change the destination to new channels on receiving track and 3 and 4. So 3 and 4 is going to be an unheard separate channel on this track, which we can use with Recomp for triggering the compression. So enable that. We'll bring up the signal all the way up to the top. And now if I play this, don't hear a change yet, but if you look at the meter, you can see that there's the kick signal there. So into Recomp we go. And we're going to set the detector input to auxiliary. And so that's going to take the inputs on 3 and 4, which is the kick, and we're going to use that as the signal for compression. So we see here on this meter, that's the kick now. I'm going to bring up the ratio. I'll turn down the threshold. And so right about there sounds pretty good, ducking down the bass a little bit every time that kick hits. To set this up for also triggering on the snare, so it's kick and snare, I'm actually just going to copy the send from the bass drum track to the snare drum. You do that by just dragging and dropping like that. And so now the snare and the kick are going to channels 3 and 4 of the bass synth. Now let's take this synth pad and let's set up the exact same thing. So I'm going to take Recomp. I'm just going to copy that from the other channel. And so I've got Recomp here, and I'm going to make a send from the hi-hat track. We're going to do it with the first shortcut I'm going to show you. I'm going to drag from the routing button of this track over into the plugin. That's automatically going to set up a sidechain input or auxiliary input. So it's automatically going to 3/4. Let's just bring it up to unity gain. And we've, because we copied the settings earlier, this is all set up and ready to go. So let's hear this now. There's actually 2 hi-hats in this. So just going to copy that. So get both of those hi-hats. So in this case, it's pumping sort of a 8th note pattern, and it's ducking at the same time as the hi-hat. You can actually flip this around. Instead of using recomp, I'll just bypass this, and let's bring in regate. And so in here, detector input, auxiliary, and we just bring up the threshold. This is going to open up the signal, let the synth pad be heard every time there's a hi-hat. So it's kind of flipping it around. And if the threshold is too high, you don't hear anything. It's got to be down in this green area. And with this, if you don't want it to completely be muted between the hits, we can bring up the dry signal to somewhere around -12 or so. So let's hear that with the rest of the track. And if we don't want this on the accent hits, so now you know sidechain compression and sidechain gating, and one shortcut, which was to drag the sending track routing button onto the plugin, which automatically sets up the auxiliary input. What else can we do here? This expand track is another bass. So we're going to set that up for sidechain compression. And there's actually a really cool script here, MPL create recomp sidechain routing. Once you assign that to a keyboard shortcut, it will take the selected track, and then whatever track you have the mouse sitting above is going to create that sidechain routing, inserting the plugin, and it's all kind of preset for you. So if I want the expand track to be the destination track, I'm going to take the bass drum track, put my mouse over the expand to track, and then hit my keyboard shortcut. And so on the expand track, I've got recomp, I've got auxiliary input set up already, and I've got a send from the bass drum track. So let's hear that now. And now that that's routed and I've got the plugin there, I can just drag and drop from this bass drum to the snare drum track, copying that send over. So now kick and snare are going to affect the bass guitar. Okay. Another cool thing you can do with this is to compress the hi-hat. And this is just a straight loop, no dynamics on this at all, but we can use the compression as a way to get some dynamics on this. So my bass drum is the sending track, my hi-hat track is the receiving track. I can hit my shortcut with my mouse hovered over the hi-hat track, and that brings up the plugin. And now I've got a accent, or sort of a anti-accent. It's going to duck down a little bit whenever the kick hits. And you can always adjust the attack and release and things like that just to make things sound even better. So here we go. All right, and let's just bypass all those sends, and we'll hear this again as it was. And you can always play around with having those on in different sections of the song. You can use signals that aren't even heard in the mix, what we call a ghost sidechain or a ghost trigger, and and have other rhythmic effects like that. So many different ways to approach this. That shortcut definitely saves a lot of time if you're using Recomp. But other plugins can be used for this. I've done a video previously on sidechaining with third-party effects. It's essentially the same thing, just making sure that you have that send going to channels 3 and 4, and whatever plugin you have in this signal chain actually has a third and fourth input for that to work. So yeah, hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter, support the Reaper blog through Patreon, and visit reaperblog.net for a lot more tutorials.